The first session that we're going to have together centers on the reason why it is important for evangelicals to engage Roman Catholicism. Actually, it is not even an option, but is a given, given the fact that it is a global issue. Wherever you go in the world, from north to south, from east to west, to the global south, to the Western world, the Catholic Church will be there and is there waiting for you. It's not a matter of your decision to engage with it. It is a matter of necessity and need, and in an unescapable need for us to engage with it. It's by far the largest religious organization in the world. More than 1.3 billion people are attached to the Roman Catholic Church around the world. And it's also one of the major, if not the major, religious player in not only the ecumenical world, but also in the multi-faith, interreligious world. And so if you want to grasp what happens, not only in your niche, in your province, in your neighborhood, in your city, in your nation, but if you want to have a grasp of what happens globally, you must address the topic of Roman Catholicism. And not only in terms of religious or interfaith initiatives, but also in terms of political initiatives. The Roman Catholic Church is the only religious body which is also a political entity, or better, contains in it, at its center a political entity known as the Vatican State, or the Holy See. And unlike all other religious organizations, Christian, non-Christian, the Catholic Church has a unique nature, or a double, in a sense, a double nature of being at the same time as having a religious face as well as a political face. And so it is also a small in terms of numbers, but quite influential political player in today's global politics. So for this reason, it's important that we engage Roman Catholicism. But it's also not only a global issue, it is also a theological issue, because the self-understanding of the Catholic Church, the claims attached to the Catholic Church, the nature, the role, the life of the Catholic Church, are theological claims centered on the self-understanding of the Church as being the prolongation of the incarnation of Jesus Christ, as being the one apostolic Catholic, Roman Catholic Church. These are big, thick claims made by the Catholic Church, and many of these claims were actually reinforced, hardened as a consequence of the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. The modern outlook of the Roman Catholic Church since the 16th century has been largely shaped by anti-Protestant positions and claims. It is only in recent decades, after Vatican II, we'll be talking about this in a moment, that the Catholic Church has somehow softened, make them milder, the claims attached to her own nature. But for 4 or 5 centuries, the outlook, the structure, the life of the Church has been marked by thick theological claims, the sacraments, the papacy, the Marian dogmas, the dogma on papal infallibility. So if we want to approach Catholicism, this is not only a sociological type of investigation, nor only an historical or spiritual or um, loosely defined religious type of study. It is a theological necessity. It involves theological in-depth studies because the Catholic Church makes theological statements about herself. And so it's also a theological issue. It is also, thirdly, an evangelistic issue. I mentioned the figure of 1.3 billion people around the world who attach themselves to the Roman Catholic identity. The issue that one of the issues that arises from the analysis of this number is that one thing is to say is to bear the label of Roman Catholic on one's forehead or on statistical figures. A different matter is to what it means for people to be Roman Catholics. And I live in Rome. I live in the heart of the Roman Catholic Church, half a mile from the Vatican. In my experience in this very important center of Roman Catholicism is that most of the people who are attached to the label Roman Catholic do not show any significant degree of spiritual life. They bear this, they carry this label as part of their cultural baggage. They carry this label as part of their family tradition. It speaks perhaps about something of their sense of belonging to a community, a culture. But other than that, when it comes to talking about the gospel, let alone believing the gospel, we are talking about practical atheists or agnostics or relativists. So it's also an evangelistic issue. We don't want to just define people statistically or sociologically as Roman Catholics, because beyond that label, many of these people are actually far away from the gospel. And we all have, perhaps in majority Roman Catholic contexts, in Europe, we all have acquaintances with neighbors, friends, colleagues, family members who may like to be identified in one way or another with the Roman Catholic Church, but they are unbelievers and they are in need to be reached out in terms of a vibrant, living, faithful gospel witness. So it's an evangelistic issue. We want to address Catholicism not only because it's a global issue in order to understand the way the world operates. It's not only a theological issue because the Catholic Church is defined by its theology. It's also an evangelistic issue because many of the Catholics around us, in Europe at least, are very far away from experiencing a living faith rooted in the biblical gospel. And so we also want to address the topic of Roman Catholicism to try to understand and find ways to reach out to our Roman Catholic neighbors. It's also, fourthly, a testing issue for many evangelicals around the world. Up to the Second Vatican Council, going back to 1962, 1965, it was the Catholic Church that was very clear in distancing itself from all other Christians. It was the Catholic Church that made clear that if you were outside of its fold, you were a heretic, you were an excommunicated, you were a pagan, you were a heathen. But Vatican II changed this overall attitude. Since Vatican II, the church has become very intentional in trying not to distance itself from other Christians or from other religions or even from secular people, but it has been intentional to build bridges and to embrace, to find commonalities, to look for ways of working together, to stress what unites rather than what divides. And so it is our responsibility to be aware of what is at stake in coming closer or farther from this ecumenical embracement by the Roman Catholic Church. As I said, before Vatican II, it was the it was the Catholic Church that made sure that everybody who were outside of its fold were considered as externals, as outsiders. But now, if you don't want to be part of this ecumenical Roman Catholic big plan and desire, we have to take a stand. We have to be aware where we stand and why in relationship to the church itself. So it's a global issue, it's a theological issue, it's an evangelistic issue, it's a testing issue, but it's finally also, I would say, a gospel issue. It's also a gospel issue. And may I explain this final point by referencing to two important Bible texts that can be helpful for us to understand what are the paradigms we are operating in when we talk about Roman Catholicism. And I refer to Philippians 1 and Galatians 1. You may recall that the Apostle Paul to the Philippians, he wrote to them in the first chapter talking about people who were going around slandering him, offending him, opposing him, and people that had reasons to be against the Apostle Paul and not liking him and actually disliking him and his ministry. And this wrong behavior by these people caused a lot of distress and anguish in the Apostle Paul. He couldn't understand why these people were so against him and opposed to him. Nonetheless, as he makes it clear in the first chapter to the Philippians, he was free and lucid enough to say that these people were actually preaching the gospel. They were against him. They had reasons to be opposed to his person and his ministry, but they were preaching the gospel. And that statement, that realization made the Apostle Paul rejoice. Although suffering, although not understanding why they were doing what they were doing, he could rejoice in the fact that what they were preaching was the gospel. So he was ready to distinguish between personal motives or contextual issues he couldn't fully understand and the content of the message, of the preaching of these people. A very different paradigm has to do with the letter to the Galatians, Galatians 1. There we find Paul dealing with people who were preaching and teaching a message that was very close to the gospel, using the very same words that the apostles were using in preaching the gospel. There were some slight differences that made this teaching very close, but at the same time radically different from the gospel. And Paul could address those messages and preachers by saying that although they were talking about religious things and although they were using biblical words, they were actually preaching another gospel, a different gospel. There were some phonetic resemblances, there were some similarity in terms, in vocabulary, but the meaning of those terms was so different that the message given resulted in a different gospel. So I think we have two ways of approaching Roman Catholicism as a whole. Whether is the gospel that for one reason or another, historical, ecclesiastical, traditional, for one reason or another, contains elements that people outside of Catholicism cannot fully understand, and also can make people nervous about dealing with them. Nonetheless, maintaining the core of the gospel, and so causing those who are outside of Roman Catholicism to rejoice because of the existence of this church and whatever is attached to it. Or, in spite of the similarities that at points seem striking and impressive, what we have in dealing with Catholicism is a different gospel that resembles the true biblical gospel, but that is in reality another gospel. So these two biblical texts are, I think, important for us to understand what is at stake when we talk gospel speaking from a gospel point of view. What is at stake when we deal with this huge, complex reality of Roman Catholicism? Is it a gospel that is somehow hidden and promoted with motives and motivations that are not fully understandable for those who are outside? Or is it another gospel that may sound like the gospel at points, but that is ultimately a different gospel? So that's a question that I want to raise, and with which I want to conclude or end this first session.